Ocean Hills at its best is when we are in it together.
I actually go to church here. I've just been unfaithful the last 3 weeks. I've been gone in India, and so just over a week ago, I had the privilege of being around New Delhi, going to different churches in these slums. And oh my gosh, it just felt like about one of the holiest days I've ever experienced. I just want to remind us, you know, I love seeing all these kids, a beautiful thing, in family camp, and these families are a beautiful thing, and we're a family. And not only that, we're a part of a huge family. The Apostles' Creed says, I believe in the fellowship, the communion of saints. And we're kind of on the tail end, by the way, of the Lord's Day, of people coming to worship. You know, it's California. I mean, you know, you got Hawaii after this, and I don't know if there's anything else, but God's people have been waking up for like 24 hours already, coming through jungles and slums and all sorts of circumstances and places to come together and worship Jesus. Isn't that awesome? We're just kind of joining into that chorus. Let me show you a couple pictures. The first one is a dump, and those are pigs at the dump, and this is actually the edge of the slum. And this is basically effectively what people walk right next to and by to come to this church, this next slide. And we walked up into the upstairs of this building. Right next to it, by the way, that's cow poop, and they're drying that for fuel. So there's a job. Anyways, you know, I'm leaving this church, and I'm on sensory overload, and I'm tired from traveling, but also my heart's just kind of wrecked being with God's people in this situation. And this is like my fourth time to India, so I'm not new to this. But it just blows your mind and your heart to see God's people gather together, singing like from their toes. Worship, you know, got a couple tambourines and something out of tune, and they're going. And so we're leaving, and I mean, to welcome us to their church. Like, can you imagine if a bunch of Indian people came in here? We would stop the service, throw flowers on them, put flower leis around them, and welcome them, put them up on stage. They were so thrilled to have us in their fellowship. So I'm just humbled. So I'm trying to say goodbye now, and I don't know why they do this, but all the men sit together and boys and all the women and girls. Maybe that's for singing, you know, lead, follow. But I'm walking out saying goodbye, and the first guy, you know, grabs both my hands and says, Jameson. I was like, oh, I'm Scott, bless you. Next guy, Jameson. I'm like, I'm Scott, really nice to meet you. And the next guy, Jameson. I'm like, wow, there's a big family. Turns out Jameson means praise the Lord. So anyways, that was special. But so we did some stuff on this trip. The next one, we went to the school. We spent most of our time at this orphanage with these boys, just having a great time. I'll show you this next picture. This is the potato field that's part of the orphanage, and that is actually the cricket field in my mind, because I played about 12 hours of cricket. If there's a doctor here, my right arm is about to fall off, because this one kid, Praveen, is my cricket coach. There he is on the left. The kid could play like 12 hours a day of cricket. My arm is still gone. Next one, there we are, little, gave him a new bat. There I am. I don't want to brag. Turns out I'm pretty good at cricket. Okay, they call me a sixer. That's kind of a home run hitter guy. But sometimes they don't like that, so they bean you with the ball. That kind of lets you know whose plate that is. Yeah, so next one. Okay, so one of the mornings, we're walking along the Ganges River. Have you been to the Ganges River? I brought some water back from the Ganges. Yeah. Okay, not really. That's tea, but that's not an exaggeration of the Ganges. Because at the Ganges River, I mean, it's disgusting. And it's this time of year right now where people make pilgrimage and they sell these plastic bottles there because everyone brings some water home with them. Because in case you die, you need to drink it. Yeah, you're gonna die. I mean, people are defecating. I mean, it's just disgusting. But we're walking along the river, and I come across a goat in a sweater. I have nothing to say. I don't know what religion this is. I don't know. Is it wool? Is that redundant? I don't know. But next slide. So we're walking along. Next slide, Lizzie. And I mean, here it is, this river. And so people come. This is where, they think Shiva came out of the water. So Hindus everywhere come to bathe in this and ritually do this deal. And we saw some stuff. And, I'm with these 14 students from Oaks Christian, and I've got this sweet little girl from Westlake Village walking next to me and going, Dr. Lisea, I just saw a wiener, I'm like, I'm sorry. I mean, there's naked guys like in white chalk from head to toe. You're like, why? But there's stuff going on, and here's cremations going on, and then they dump the ashes into the deal. And 5 yards down the river, there's a guy, spitting water out and doing this ritual cleansing deal, all to get clean. And we're going to come back to that. All to get clean. So we're walking, and here's like classic Hollywood Indian moment. 2 kids show up with 2 baskets with cobras in them and the flute. The cobras start coming out, right? And they say, hey, does anyone want to put the cobra around their neck? Heck no, were my words. But one of the teachers, Susan, decided she was going to do this. So she put the cobra around her neck. And I turned to the other teacher chaperone. And in a moment of Holy Spirit inspiration, I said, Bo, if I have ever prayed for a snake to poop, it's right now. Come, Holy Spirit. Next picture. That snake unloaded on Susan. It was the first miracle that I got to be a part of on the subcontinent. Incredible. Could have healed the woman next to the snake, but no, I chose this. And that was special. The next one. Okay, so this crowd was there, and they were kind of getting ready. They had a guy in a microphone and a speaker leading them in a prayer. And again, it's all about this desire, and it's a universal human thing to try to get clean, to try to figure out how to get clean. It's largely what religion does in any context, is say, how do we get clean? Like from the inside out, is there something on the outside that I can do to get my inside clean? And actually, while I was in India, or maybe taking off for it, I got an email from John saying, hey, could we do a talk just on the cross? We're in the middle of this series on Colossians, and it actually makes a lot of sense right now, because we're going to talk about something. We're going to get clear on how you and I get clean, because we're no different than these Indian people. We need to be clean. The world has a cleanliness problem, an inside soul-level problem that we cannot bathe ourselves out of. And so we're going to get really clear this morning on what the scriptures say about getting clean. And just caution, little flag, sticker, religion can get in the way of getting clean really quickly. So we need to be very clear on Jesus and very clear on what good religion is and what harmful religion is. So we're going to talk about that. And it makes context, or great sense in context of Colossians, because, gosh, Colossians 1, just the beautiful Christ poem, who he is. He's God in the flesh, which, by the way, the disciples did not understand until after he'd been resurrected. You understand that even when he was on the cross, they didn't understand that he was God in the flesh, maybe Messiah. But he's God in the flesh. And then Colossians 2, Paul's telling us, participate in this. We enter in on this. And Colossians 3, just basically an invitation to live a different kind of life because of this. So we're gonna talk about the cross. Now, here's the thing about Jesus. He is what he says and what he does. He's perfectly consistent between those things. So he's going to demonstrate for us grace and mercy and love on the cross. But it's totally consistent with what he had been saying. Do you remember the prodigal story? That story gets a lot of attention, and it should. It's a bottomless, I think it's his best work. That parable is bottomless. Do you remember the scene where this father had lost, well, first he sets it up, a shepherd had lost 1 sheep out of 100. Okay, that's a 1% loss. Stay with me, accountants. Okay, then there's a woman who has lost 1 coin out of 10. That's 10%. Then there's a father who has lost both sons. 1 to rebellion, 1 to religion. 100% loss. And here's what happens in the story. The younger son, who's just lived this crazy life of sin and living the Vita Loca, decides to come back to enter into a religious relationship with his dad. I'll play my role as a worker. You feed me. It will go no further. I'm just dying out here. I need food. That's his plan. He comes back to the father's house. And by cultural norm, the son should have gotten the snot kicked out of him. He should have been beaten and shamed and basically excommunicated from the community. But instead, Jesus tells us a story where the father gets up, loses all dignity, a foreshadow of the cross, loses all dignity by lifting up his robes and showing his ankles, and runs down the driveway and doesn't beat his son, but throws his arms around him, hugs him and kisses him, cries out and says, go get the robe. This guy, he doesn't look like my son. Let's dress him like a family member. Go get the family ring. Put it on his finger. Go get shoes. Only slaves have shoes, are shoeless. Get him shoes. He's a son. And then go kill the fattened calf. We're going to barbecue. We're going to party. We're going to celebrate. The son of mine that was lost has now been found. The son of mine that was dead, he's alive. And in that story, Jesus shows us the heart of the Father. Can you just receive that for yourself for a moment right now? That no matter where you have been, no matter what you have done, or no matter what you have not done and your religion is cold and lifeless and virtually not helping at all, that God's response for you and I is that he is running towards us with his arms wide open saying, I have so much more for you than you dare dream. All has been forgiven. Come into this intimacy, this father and son thing, this father and daughter thing. Come into that. Well, he tells this story, and it blows the minds of the people listening. There's tax collectors and sinners on the left, and Pharisees and scribes on the right, and they're all either offended or blown away by this story, which is the point. And then he lives it out. And where he lives this out most truly is on the cross. And if you have your scriptures with you, we're going to sort of get in the fast lane and do a little skipping and bumping through John 18 through 20. But here's the setting for the cross, what we celebrate together. First of all, it starts with Jesus being betrayed by one of his own, by Judas. Judas had been a disciple as long as anybody else had been a disciple, and he's in the crowd with him. He's listening to all this stuff, and Jesus' teaching was offensive to Judas, his disciple. Just take note of that for yourself. If you've ever not been offended by Jesus' teaching, check yourself. It's totally offensive to your will, to your sense of sometimes what's religiously right. And Judas is, we give Judas a lot of guff, but you know what? I disagree with, or I chafe at Jesus' teaching often because it requires so much at times. So Judas had had enough. He'd said, hey, this is no Messiah. So he sells Jesus out. Here's the setting that, Jesus is with his disciples in the garden, and Judas shows up. Verse 2, Jesus met the disciples. So Judas, having procured a band of soldiers and some officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees, went with these lanterns and torches and weapons. And they show up to arrest Jesus. Well, one of my favorite scenes, doesn't get enough publicity. Simon Peter somewhere pulls out a sword. I don't know why the fisherman was carrying a sword that day. Maybe it's a rough neighborhood. Pulls his sword out and he says, have at you. And he chops off the ear. The guy's name is Malchus. He is a servant of one of the chief priests, right? And and Jesus basically says, hey, enough of that, sorry. And Malchus is like, what? And Jesus, picks up the ear, puts it, sorry, Jesus is being arrested and betrayed, and just at time out, we got to heal this. He heals the guy's ear. I love Jesus. And he basically says, hey, we're not fighting our way out of this. And this picture by Salvador Dali is one of my favorite. It came to him in a vision. And if you stare at the painting, which I'm just going to keep up there for the rest of the time, you'll notice that there's no spikes holding Jesus to the cross. And in Dali's mind and heart, when he was woken from this dream, that's what struck him, is Jesus chose this. He chose to go through with it. Yes, there was the angst in the garden, and that was real. Jesus knew the cup that was coming, and it was terrible. And he asked God, if there's another way, let's go that way. But at the end, he chose it. The most beautiful act of love and sacrifice. So he goes on with the soldiers. And so the band of soldiers and their captain and the officers arrested Jesus and bound him. First they led him to Annas, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year. They led him to Annas, who used to be the high priest. And can I just say this? What an unfortunate name. Okay, parents, if you're going to name your child, maybe not Annas, okay? Going to be the butt of a lot of jokes, going to have a tough time in school. But somehow, anyways, this guy, became a high priest. But I think he's bitter, and I would be. Some of you are just getting that now. Anyways, don't ask me my favorite planet. Okay, so while this is going on, Peter is denying Jesus, so that even another one of Jesus' close friends and apostles is denying him in this moment of loneliness and obedience. Verse 19, the high priest then questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. And Jesus said, I've spoken openly in the world. I've always taught out in the synagogues and the temple where all the Jews came together. I've said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Those that have heard, they've heard what I'm saying. And immediately one of the soldiers becomes offended and strikes Jesus in the face and says, how dare you speak to the high priest? Technicality, formerly high priest. So then they sent him off to Caiaphas' house. He was the high priest. Then they sent him ultimately off to Pilate. And it was early morning. And yet this crowd that had had their religious sense of dignity shattered and offended and was angry at Jesus came as early morning. They didn't themselves enter into the governor's headquarters because they didn't want to be defiled so that they could still eat the Passover. Do you see the irony of this? It's important to pay attention that Jesus was offensive to the politics of the time, to the economics of the time, and to the religion of the time. And he still is. He still is. He challenges all of that to say that life in the kingdom of God is different. And so at the end, they all conspire together to come against him. So he's before Pilate. And Pilate asked the crowd, what accusation do you bring against this man? In a case of solid defense, they say, we wouldn't have brought him if he wasn't guilty. I rest my case. He says, well, take him yourselves. Go judge him by your own law. And they say, it's not lawful. We are not able to put someone to death. They're already looking at the penalty, not the process. And so they stick him with Pilate. Now, Pilate's in a bit of a fix. He's got to keep order. He has to represent Caesar here. And yet he actually finds no fault with Jesus. And it's fascinating, if you can go back and spend some more time in John 18 and 19, look at Pilate and Jesus and their interaction. It's fascinating dialogue. We'll hit some of it right now. He comes in, he asks Jesus, are you the king of the Jews? Jesus said, do you say this of your own account, or did others say it about me? Pilate says, am I a Jew? Am I religious? Your own people have delivered to you for what you've done. And Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would be fighting right now. Pilate said, so you are a king. Now remember, if I ask you if you're a king, that doesn't mean anything. But if a ruler, the occupying forces ruler, asks you if you're a king, he's asking Jesus if he's a threat. Jesus said, you say that I'm a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world. So he brings him out to the people, Pilate does, and he says, look, I find no fault in him. What do you want? How about this? I release someone each time a year just to show my sort of graciousness. I'm going to release Jesus to you. And the crowd sees, screaming. Now, they've already been working the scenes, behind the scenes, saying, working the crowd, and they're saying, release Barabbas. And so the crowd starts chanting, release Barabbas, Barabbas. And Barabbas was a bad dude. You don't want Barabbas out on the streets. But they would rather have Jesus put away and killed. So the crowd turns against Pilate. He's in this impossible situation, so he says, okay, we're going to flog him. So they take Jesus and they flog him. Now, the Roman soldiers were experts at torture. And what the flogging was they would take Jesus' hands and bind them by the wrists and stretch it through. There was a pole with an eyelet at the top, and that would stretch his skin across his back. And the Roman soldier would then take a cat of nine tails, and it was a short-handled whip with 9 leather strands on it, and tied into each strand would be weights, pottery shards, glass, whatever would have some weight and cutting ability to it. And they would whip that down on the victim and dig it in, and then kind of get a purchase on the person's body, and then they would turn and pull. And so that every lash wasn't just a whipping, it was a tearing away. And legend had it that 40 of those and you're dead. And so 39 lashes to really instill torture. And so Jesus is flogged beyond recognition, bloodied and messed up. They put a crown of Judean thorns on his head and beat it down around his brow to make fun of him. Oh, he's a king, he's a king. They put a purple robe on him, made fun of him. They blindfolded him and they said, well, if you're a king, then tell us Which one of us just hit you? Bam! And they punched Jesus out. They pulled handfuls of his beard out. They humiliated him. At the end of all this, Pilate brings about and he says, look, behold him. I find no fault in him. And the crowd screams out, but he made himself out to be the Son of God. This gets Pilate's attention. He freaks out. He runs back inside to Jesus and he says, where are you from? Because I think Pilate sees something different in Jesus. This isn't just another person that's being put through Roman torture and punishment. After this, Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, if you release this man, you're no friend of Caesar's, as if they cared about pleasing Caesar. So he gave Jesus over to be crucified. And the process of crucifixion was the most brutal thing that the Romans could devise to kill a man. It took time, and it made a statement. It would be like going down to, once you hit Ventura, you can start to see the billboards again. It would be like killing someone up on a billboard publicly and it taking days to transpire. It was a statement that said, don't mess with Rome. And the process was brutal. Jesus would have to carry one of the crossbeams on his back. He walked the way of the roses through the city, people spitting on him, hurling insults on him. If you've seen the movie Braveheart, you remember how at an execution, it would be a public sort of entertainment event. This, no TV, you got to sort of watch it live. And there they are, and Jesus is coming through with the other criminals that are going to be killed that day. And they get up to the place of the skull, Golgotha. And they laid Jesus down. And they took a long spike and crossed his feet over one another and nailed it into the wood. And then they put the crossbeam on the cross. And they stretched his hands out and took the nail, most likely through his wrists, and stretched him out and nailed him to the cross. And then they picked him up and dropped it in the hole. And the process of crucifixion was brutal because you didn't bleed to death. You died of suffocation. Because every time you needed to take a deep breath, you had to stand up on that spike. And so slowly his lungs would fill with fluid. Slowly he would die. And this was crucifixion. Well, Jesus did a couple things. He said a couple things from up on the cross. We don't have time to look at them all. They're incredible. They're captured in different snapshots in the 4 different Gospels. One of them was to take care of his mom, which was one of the most beautiful little statements. And the last thing he said, as he hung on the cross, he hollered out, "Telestai!" It is finished. It's finished. And I want to talk just briefly about what he meant by "it is finished." Because that word doesn't mean just it's finished, but it means it's completed, it's fulfilled, it's satisfied. And he's not just talking about his earthly life in a body. He's talking about something larger. And theologians wrestle about this and have always wrestled about this. And some would posit that there's sort of one theory of atonement. I'm saying that what happened on the cross was so necessary, the problem so big, that it required an enormous solution. And what happened on the cross was beyond one theory and bigger than any of my words will do justice to this morning. But we can know something about it. The first thing he did is he took all of our filth. Let's just say that this filthy Ganges water represents not just an ugly river in India, but your sin, my sin, everything I've ever thought and done and left undone. Jesus, this theologians would say, he's our propitiation. Okay, that's a term from the courts of justice. It says that he took our punishment for us. He was also our sacrifice. You think of the Passover lamb in the Old Testament story, that the blood had to be spread over the doorpost to save the faithful families. Well, Jesus was our sacrifice. You can go around the world. I've been in Nepal where they're still slaughtering bulls for blood sacrifice to try to get clean. And what happened is that Jesus took our filth and pinned it to the cross. That it's everything you've done. It's everything that I've done. It's every evil ever done by anyone in all time. Sacrificed for us. That's where it is. You don't carry it anymore. You don't own it anymore. You're not bound by it anymore. This is a religious term, a sacrifice. He's also reconciled us. This is a relational term. That whatever distance was between God and mankind was bridged in this act of sacrifice. He's reconciled us. He's brought us back together. And He's made it possible, by the way, for you and I to be put back together with one another. Stop the presses. That'll change your life right there. See, this isn't something that you believe one time and live a nice life afterwards. This is something that we accept, that we believe, and that we participate in. So some of you this morning, you've heard the story so many times, you're like, I give them about a 7 on presentation. Maybe the news for you this morning is that you are an ambassador of reconciliation. That everything you've ever done and the person that you're sideways with has ever done has been taken care of. So forgive. Be an ambassador of this kind of reconciling life. Let's be people of the cross. He's done this with the whole story. He did it with the prodigal story, the father and the sons. And He's doing it with you and I. He, God, in the flesh, forgave all of our sin. How universal is that human desire to be forgiven? He cleansed us. What religion fails to do, Jesus did. He cleansed us. But there's more. We have to keep going. Telestai. He redeemed us. This is an economic term. These are all words that come out of things in the scriptures over time, and theologians. He redeemed us. He gave us value again. We didn't have value. We had lost it. Originally created in the image of God, ruined by sin, He redeemed us, given us value as beloved sons and daughters again. He did this not because we're good, and not because we deserve it, and not because we earned it, but because He's good, and He's so loving. And He can make us good because of it. He also rescued us. He rescued us from evil. Sometimes you have to get out of our culture. That's why I think one of the benefits of going somewhere else in the world, sometimes you can see evil a little more clearly and then come home and see it around you. He rescued us from evil. Some of the evil that I saw in India was that, when you believe certain things, like that these untouchable Dalit people are in this station of life because of something that they've done in a past life, that is an evilness that has all sorts of effects on human rights and everything else. And you have this whole population of people believing that they are the judgment of God, that they deserve evil. He rescued us from that and being stuck in that. And it would have been enough if He just would have rescued me from myself. But He's also done that. We've got to keep going. Telestai, fulfilled. He rescued us. He saved us. He saved us from judgment and from bondage and slavery and death. Paul sums up the gospel in one beautiful sentence in Galatians 5:1. He says this: it was for freedom that Christ set you free. We're rescued from being a slave to the things that lead to death. I know that you and I still participate in those, but we're freed from that. We're freed from the necessity to have to be stuck there anymore. We've got to keep going because it's big. It's a big term. It's completed. He demonstrated to us how to live, I think, by how He died. That needs to be a whole sermon series in itself. Watching what He said on the cross, watching how He went through at the cross, I think Jesus taught us how to live life on this side of the cross. He also made it possible to fix the broken heart of the world and us. It's finished. It's completed. It's fulfilled. It's not the end of the story. That's why we're ramping up to Easter. Easter's the, hey, baby, punch out, knockout punch right there. This is not the end of the story, but this is such a necessary thing for you and I to grab onto and to understand and to come to terms with. And here's what I want you to hear this morning. It's for every one of us. And it's still for every one of us. I used to read the prodigal story like it's a one-time story of how someone came to faith, or, oh yeah, I was a prodigal, then I came back. My experience with Jesus is that I need to keep coming back. My experience with Jesus that I keep finding sin that I wasn't even aware of in my life, that I can now thank him for redeeming and now ask him to lead me in living a different life. So this is something that we accept, it's something that we believe, and it's something that we participate in. We're going to celebrate this in a moment at the communion table. This is what baptism is. You go under the water, you get sprinkled on water to symbolize you died with Christ, be risen with Christ. Participate in this. Live differently because of this. It's not enough, you guys, for you and I to believe this here and let it stay there. We've got to figure out a way to become people of the cross who know how to die to themselves and sacrifice for others and bring reconciliation where there is none and peace where there's war and God's kind of justice where there's no justice. It's not enough to have an idea or a philosophy or religion that just stays in our mind. It's for you and I. It's the greatest love story ever. This is why we talk about Easter. So let me just stop there. And before Jono introduces communion, let's just take a moment in silence. And my encouragement to us is to just say, Holy Spirit, come. And some of us in the room actually need to accept this for the first time today. To just, in the silence of your own heart and prayer, just simply say to God in a moment, I receive this. I believe this. I want this to count for me. And some of us need to come back to letting this have its full effect on our hearts. Have whatever conversation with the Lord that you need to have.